What happens when one of the most profitable businesses in media history starts disappearing? Not declining, not slowing down, disappearing. For decades, ESPN was worth billions to Disney. Some analysts called it the most valuable asset in the entire company. Not Marvel, not Star Wars, not Disney's theme parks, ESPN. At its peak, ESPN was generating so much cash that it helped finance Disney's entire empire. Then millions of households started canceling cable. And suddenly, Disney faced a terrifying possibility. What if the machine that funded everything stopped working? Stay with this story, because the answer may determine the future of Disney itself. To understand why Disney can't let ESPN die, you first have to understand what ESPN became. Disney acquired Capital Cities/ABC in 1995 for approximately $19 billion. That acquisition gave Disney control of ESPN. At the time, few people realized what Disney had really purchased, because ESPN wasn't simply a sports channel. It was a money-printing machine. The economics were extraordinary. Every month, cable companies paid Disney carriage fees for ESPN. Then consumers paid their cable bills. Then advertisers paid to reach ESPN's audience. The same content generated revenue multiple times. And because live sports remained one of the few types of programming people insisted on watching in real time, ESPN became incredibly powerful. Year after year, subscriber fees increased. Advertising revenue increased, sports rights expanded, and Disney collected billions. Throughout the 2000s and early 2010s, ESPN became the crown jewel of Disney's television business. Some years, ESPN alone generated billions in operating profit. The network wasn't just successful, it was helping fund Disney's broader strategy. Movies, theme parks, acquisitions, expansion. A significant portion of Disney's financial strength was connected to ESPN. Then the environment started changing. Slowly at first, then all at once. The threat wasn't another sports network. It wasn't a competitor. It was consumer behavior. The rise of streaming fundamentally changed how people consumed media. Netflix proved audiences no longer wanted expensive cable bundles. They wanted direct access, flexible subscriptions, on-demand viewing. The consequences were enormous. Millions of Americans began canceling traditional cable subscriptions. This phenomenon became known as cord cutting, and every household that left cable represented a problem for ESPN, because ESPN's business model depended on scale. For decades, tens of millions of households paid for ESPN whether they watched sports or not. That was the beauty of cable. Sports fans subsidized the channel. Non-sports fans subsidized it too. Everyone paid. Then that structure began collapsing. As cable subscriptions fell, ESPN's subscriber base shrank. And unlike a normal television network, ESPN faced a second problem. Sports rights were becoming more expensive. The NFL, the NBA, college football, Major League Baseball, every new contract cost more. So ESPN was experiencing a dangerous squeeze. Distribution revenue was declining. Content costs were rising. The old formula was breaking. And Disney knew it. Because if ESPN weakened significantly, the effects could spread across the entire company. This wasn't simply a television problem. It was a Disney problem. Disney's solution was radical. Instead of defending the old model forever, it would attempt to build a new one. The first step was ESPN Plus. Launched in 2018, ESPN Plus represented Disney's first serious move toward a direct-to-consumer sports business. But ESPN Plus was never intended to replace the main ESPN network immediately. It was a bridge, a way to learn, a way to build streaming capabilities, a way to prepare for the future. Then Disney launched Disney Plus. Then it expanded Hulu. Then it created bundle packages combining all three services. Disney was no longer building individual products, it was building an ecosystem. And ESPN was expected to play a central role. But the transition carried enormous risks. Sports are expensive. Consumers are sensitive to subscription prices. And unlike movies or television shows, sports rights must constantly be renewed. Lose the rights, lose the audience, lose the business. That reality created pressure throughout Disney. Bob Iger faced an uncomfortable challenge. The company needed to preserve ESPN's cash flow, while simultaneously preparing for a future where cable might no longer exist. Those objectives often conflicted. Move too slowly, and streaming competitors gain ground. Move too quickly, and Disney damages its own television business. It was one of the most complicated strategic balancing acts in modern media. And the stakes were massive. The results are still unfolding. But one thing became clear. Disney no longer sees ESPN as a cable channel. It sees ESPN as a platform. That shift changes everything. Instead of depending entirely on distributors, Disney can build direct relationships with sports fans, collect user data, sell subscriptions, control pricing, control distribution, control the customer relationship. The same transformation that drove Disney Plus is now reshaping ESPN. At the same time, ESPN remains critically important financially. Even as subscriber losses continue, ESPN still generates substantial revenue through advertising, affiliate fees, and sports partnerships, which explains why Disney continues investing heavily in sports rights. Because live sports remain one of the few forms of content capable of attracting massive audiences at scale. And that makes ESPN strategically unique. Let me ask you something. If you were Bob Iger, would you aggressively move ESPN into streaming today, or would you protect cable profits for as long as possible? Leave your answer in the comments, because that exact question may define ESPN's future, and possibly Disney's. The company's upcoming direct-to-consumer ESPN service represents perhaps the biggest media gamble Disney has made since launching Disney Plus. Success could create a new growth engine. Failure could expose how difficult it is to replace decades of cable economics. The story of ESPN isn't really about sports, it's about adaptation. For decades, Disney benefited from one of the most profitable distribution systems ever created. Then technology changed, consumer behavior changed, and the rules changed. The lesson is simple. No business model lasts forever, not even one that generates billions of dollars annually. Companies often fail because they become attached to the systems that made them successful. Disney understands that risk. That's why ESPN is being reinvented. Not because the old model stopped working completely, but because management knows where the trend is heading. The future belongs to companies that control both content and distribution. That is why Disney can't let ESPN die. Because losing ESPN wouldn't just mean losing a sports network. It would mean losing one of the strategic pillars that helped build the modern Disney empire. And replacing that pillar may be one of the hardest challenges Bob Iger has ever faced. If you enjoy stories about the business decisions behind media empires, consider subscribing, because the next story explores another Disney asset facing a very different kind of crisis. Because while Disney was fighting to save ESPN, another one of its biggest acquisitions was facing a completely different problem. A franchise that wasn't losing subscribers, it was losing trust. The story of how Disney acquired Star Wars looked like a master stroke, until the strategy began creating problems nobody expected. And that may be one of the most fascinating lessons in franchise management ever seen.